So welcome back, everyone, to our second discussion today within our series of talks for our seminar week called What's Next? As guests for our second talk today, we are very happy to welcome Gabriela Bruno and Raffael Büchi. Gabriela Bruno is a real estate consultant at Wüest&Partner AG in Zürich. She before studied architecture at the ETH Zürich and at the City College of New York, where she also worked as a teaching assistant. For 2 years, she worked as a project manager at Space 4 Architecture, before then joining Wüest&Partner AG in 2015. Wüest&Partner AG was founded in 1985 and is an independent owner-operated consultant company focusing on the construction and real estate markets. Raffael Büchi is the co-founder, legal counsel, and press spokesman of Projekt Interim GmbH, which was founded in 2013 and which is Switzerland's largest specialist for the organization and administration of temporary uses of real estate. Projekt Interim offers temporary residential, office, commercial, and retail spaces at attractive conditions to bridge vacancies in real estate. They currently manage 57 projects with more than 800 temporary users. Raffael Büchi is also the founder and owner of OW Legal, a company specializing in advising legal departments, law firms, and public authorities on operational excellence, digitalization and automation, knowledge management, and business development. As we are in our studio, through the project of the students researching new ways of using and projecting ideas for living and working into very generic office buildings, we are very excited and curious now about the talk with you two, and would like to let you start the talk with a short introduction about you and your work. Gabriela, would you like to start?
Yes, I'd like to start. I don't see your screen, so you tell me when my slides are up. Look, I can see it. So, hi everyone. I feel very honored being here, and I'm very looking forward to our discussion. I put together just 5 slides telling my little story that Barbara already told you, but with some images to illustrate it a little bit better. So if you go to the next page, there you go. So I started my architecture career in 2005 at the ETH Zürich. So like you guys, I studied at the ETH. It was light-minded decision to study architecture. I didn't know what I was getting into. It was very tough, but I learned a lot. Like for me, what was the biggest thing I learned is that with hard work, I can get everything I want, more or less. I learned at the ETH to become a really solid architect. You learn a lot about theory, details, technical stuff, etc. I'm telling this particularly in contrast to my studies in New York, but to that I'll come later. So after finishing my bachelor at the ETH, I had to do my internship, and I decided to apply in New York, which I got my internship at Architectonics. That was a little architecture firm in New York. And I stayed there for some months. And when it was time to come back to Switzerland, I decided to stay since I was so blown away by the city. And therefore, I did my master at the City College of New York. You can go to the next slide. So here, I won't talk about the projects I did, neither at the ETH nor at the City College, but why I put these images is to show the difference. Like there was really, at the ETH, it was more about becoming a solid architect, while at the City College, it was more about being conceptual and having fun and experimenting, and not necessarily very reality-oriented. For me personally, that was the perfect combination of 2 very different approaches to architecture, and I would never do it differently. I would never want to miss my ETH studies, but neither the ones in New York. So that was my experience as a student. After that, I applied for work, and I found a very nice job at this boutique company in New York City. It was Space for Architecture. It was around 12 people, mostly Italians, which suited my character. And I had a lot of fun. What I appreciated the most is that they really, from day one, told me, this is your project and you go for it. So I was thrown into the cold water, as you say in German. And I was project managing a townhouse. There used to be 8 apartments. You see it at the far right of the slide. It was 8 apartments that were converted in one big building for a rich, lucky French family. That was a fantastic project to learn so much about. It took really 2 years from the beginning till the end. It was landmark protected, so we couldn't change much of the facade, but inside we completely emptied it and changed everything. And it even got awarded. Here you see that by the AIA. It was my pride and joy, that project. What I also was in charge of was the Bonobos concept store design. I thought this is also relevant to the what's next conversation of today, since Bonobos is male clothing brands. They do suits, pants, but they don't sell in their stores. They only sell online. So these stores are really to just go and touch the fabric, try it on, eventually take an iPad that is there and order it, but you won't go with a bag home. I think these are things that, even though that was 8 years ago in New York, these are things that are starting to come now to Switzerland. Like the idea, like you see it in the center bottom, was to create kind of a living room. They would serve you a beer, you would feel at home. And the very left bottom, I put some construction site photos to illustrate the construction site security in New York. Like, it was crazy. We can go to the next slide. After 2 years of really intense work, some of my priorities shifted, and I was looking really. I wanted to come back home, Switzerland, closer to my family, maybe creating my own family with my husband. So Switzerland seemed a much safer option for that. I didn't want to just come back again as an architect. I was looking for a next challenge and found this CUREM, which is the Center of Urban and Real Estate Management, and did the MIS in real estate in 2015-16. Which was really important for my architecture. I had the part of architecture, design, project management, but I was missing a lot of economic know-how, which I could acquire in these 1.5 years. For my master's thesis, inspired by the New York high-risers, etc., I compared the building process for high-risers in the city of Zurich with the one in New York, which was a very interesting task. I had interviews with the developers of the 10 highest buildings in New York, which you see in that chart on the right side, and also interviews with the developers of the 10 highest buildings in Zurich, which are those short ones on the left. And that was a very good addition to my architecture studies. While I was studying at the CUREM, you can change slide. I got my job at Wüest&Partner. It really helped me that I was studying at CUREM to get my job there. And I am there since 2015 now. And it is a very nice combination of all my skills I have acquired so far. It's a relatively big company, and there are many different specialists, like some are data scientists, others do a lot of evaluation. My main specialty is really strategic consultancy. So I truly do, it needs a lot of creativity. Like for instance, the slide, like the images that I put there, these are different graphs that it was about a whole city block, like part of a neighborhood that was being newly developed, and how the ground floors of the buildings should be used, like what type of retail, what type of activities should be done there, so a completely new city part could be relatively fastly integrated and not feel like nowhere's land. So first you do really a market analysis. You check who lives there, what are the preferences, who is the target group that you want to attract, and based on that market analysis, you ideally you have a set of references, international reference that work, and you propose things that maybe you have seen somewhere else in different countries that work very well, and you just give in the paper, and then the developers will execute it or not. I see a big difference. My experience in New York always gives me good references for Switzerland, but this is, at some point this will go away, because still my references from 5 years ago feel completely fresh in Switzerland because it comes so much later. In New York, it's really a laboratory for experiments. Like, people really try new things. Some work not. In Switzerland, we rather tend to maybe copy things that work very well in New York and not try completely something new, if I may say so. So this is a little background excerpt of my, how from an architect I became a real estate consultant. Raffael Büchi, I would give you the word.
Thank you. That was already really interesting.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. I studied law to the displeasure of my dad, who was an ETH student and thought law was nothing. And I worked as a lawyer for about 8 years, and then in one of the projects we had at the Zürich law firm in real estate, one of our clients had a big office building at Badnerstrasse, and that big office building had about 5,000 square meters, 4 floors, and had been used by UBS IT for about 35 years. And this owner of the building had never been in the building for 35 years, had just gotten rent. And then UBS in the financial crisis emptied that building, and all of a sudden this whole house at Badnerstrasse was empty. And my law firm, Bärenkarrer, had the task to facilitate the sale of this building to interested parties. But in the meantime, until the sale would be done, the building was empty. And we discussed what we could do during a coffee break. And because I had been a temporary user of a villa close to the Rote Fabrik for 2 years, I thought, Zwischennutzung, that could be something fantastic to do. And at first, the clients and also Wüest&Partner was on the advisory side, and then Bärenkarrer and another law firm, all these established players, they said, well, Zwischennutzung, temporary use projects, as I envisaged it, with a lot of different smaller parties, artists, young people using all this space. They said, let's try to find another business that wants to rent 2 floors, or maybe the garage next door could use some space, or maybe the city police of Zürich could use the building to train. And then, of course, no one had use on a short notice for that amount of space, and the building remained empty until, and was guarded by Securitas, 2 guys around the clock. By the way, that costs a Securitas guard costs about 400,000 Swiss francs a year, 24/7. So Securitas was guarding the building, but nevertheless, on a Monday morning at 2 o'clock, Hausbesetzer, occupiers broke a window and climbed in, about 35 of them, then put their transparents and signs out. We are taking the property from the banks back, and they do that to signal that they're not burglars, but squatters. That's the right expression, squatters, Hausbesetzer. The mechanism is that if you have Hausbesetzer in a squatters in a building in the city of Zürich, the police doesn't automatically move them out. The police only moves them out if the owner can show that either there's a real immediate danger, for example, the building could collapse, or it's a really old landmark protected building that they could destroy. Either that, or that he, the owner, has use for the building immediately and he has a concrete plan to fill the space, for example, with a Zwischennutzung, a temporary use project. But it needs to be real, it can't just be a hoax, like a lease agreement with a friend or something that would never move into that building. And the third possible requirement you have to fill to make the police move the squatters out is that you can prove that you're just about to reconstruct or tear down the building. If you can't show that you have any of these plans to be turned into immediate action, then the police says, well, we would recommend arrange yourselves with the squatters, make a temporary use contract, and then just let them be. And our client is a former colonel of the Swiss military, about 65. He had absolutely no understanding for that kind of attitude and police practice. So I got then, because no one else had really a better idea, I got to put my temporary use projects to practice, and I just started asking people, mainly students from the ZHDK, so the art school in Zurich, and then other people from my creative side of my contact book. And we started offering each room for 80 francs a month flat in Gebrauchsleihe. So lend to use, 80 francs flat, regardless of the size of the room. And then we could quickly fill the building. There was an interesting showdown then with the squatters and the police and politics involved and whatnot. I could talk about this for a long time, but under the bottom line was that I got to organize my interim use project, ended up having 120 people, and I administered that. And it's just really administration. That means set up the internet, make sure the trash is taken out. If it's not taken out, take it out yourself. Going there every evening after work, and I worked as a lawyer, so it was a bit of a stressful phase. But it was also really fun. We painted the community room, had a cafeteria there, and then for 2 years, for example, I put up there a stereo, actually a public address system, sound system, Yamaha with a subwoofer, and kind of as an experiment wanted to check if that gets stolen or not. And it was never stolen, never damaged. And it worked really quite well with 120 people in this building. And then when we had to move out because the building was sold to Mobimo, two of the people that were Zwischennutzer in the building had helped me with the administration and the organization after a while. And the three of us said we should turn this into a business, because it's also a pity if all these cool people don't find any space now. And then we tried and successfully tried to find a new office building. We got one from Ledermann Immobilien, a landmark building in Seefeld, Hevelin, something, you guys know these architects. But anyway, it was a 45 million building, and we had that for another 2 years. And then we founded the GmbH, and we just said, we're going to make a business out of this. We're going to organize interim use projects, and we're going to organize interim use projects for whatever comes our way. One family homes, specialties, factory halls, multi offices buildings, multi family buildings. And just to show you a little bit what kind of projects we had, I'm going to share my screen here. And so here you see, because I had actually a presentation, a few slides, but they're all in German. So I thought going on the website is probably easier to keep it in English. And it just gives you an idea of the variety. This one is our biggest running project, former hotel, 4-star hotel, Waldhaus, with about 120 people living there. I'm actually sitting here in this living room because my family lives in this Zwischennutzung. You see there are office buildings, one-family homes, and also some really odd objects like the former reservoir of the sweet water of the city of Zürich, which is its catacombs, really interesting, also unsafe, and we could really do a lot there, apart from a few photo shootings. But so the challenge for us was to make a business that doesn't make a lot of money, not a lot of margin, but turns this non-used space, a vacant space, into something that can be used creatively by people, or used just as a living space always for a finite period of time. And you can only do that because it's a lot of work. You have so many different clients at the moment. As Barbara pointed out, we have about 800. So you need to invoice every single one of them. You need to communicate with all these people. So we really had to set up our organization in a smart, digitalized way. For example, we don't send back and forth contracts. We do everything online. It's click contracts. We have, I think, pretty state-of-the-art a team organization and communication tools, accounting tools. And if we were not so lean and tech savvy, we probably couldn't have done this business, because it's low margin. And traditional administration companies, and you have hundreds of them in Switzerland, they never did this because for them it's not attractive. It's too many clients, too much of a turnover, no long contracts, no money, so we're not doing it. And that's the entrepreneurial challenge, which fascinated us to overcome that and say, hey, we can turn this into something that works. And it did. And I think that's a good motto also as architects, that you look at projects and buildings and you just think, well, the world says we can't really do this, but let's see, we should be turning this into something that works. So that's a bit of my background on the Projekt Interim side.
Perfect. Thank you very much for both of your introductions. It was very interesting to hear. I'll hand over to our students.
Well, also thank you from our side for your introduction. The next part, we would like to be maybe more interactive also with the audience online or here in the audience. So whenever somebody has a question, just raise your hand and we will come up to you, because we feel like this topic is very much somehow facing our topic of the semester. So whenever you have a question, just come up and we will just kick it off with the first one. So yesterday we were talking about the future of architecture and architecture education. And we ask ourselves that we often speak about the shift in focus from constructing new buildings towards working with the existing fabric of our cities and how to intervene with that. So architecture slowly moves away from the phrase architecture as a building and adding a question mark to that sentence. So where do you see your field of work in that shift of focus, and how do you think investment will have a say in the whole argument of not building new spaces, but reusing existing spaces? Or maybe asking different, how do you think your field of work can support a change in the architectural perception?
Maybe I can start here, because actually the building at the Badnerstrasse 595, that was our very first Zwischennutzung in 2011. It was bought, it's a pretty ugly office building, but it had some interesting features. And Mobimo that bought it kind of wanted to run or run the Zwischennutzung on a bit to see if that area in Altstetten could be attractive for kind of young and cool people, and they did then turn the building into something quite modern and actually really good looking now. And it has one side towards the Badnerstrasse, which is heavy trafficked road, that is just ateliers. And then on the other side, you have lofts where you can live, and you can combine these ateliers with lofts. So you pay for living space on the back side, and then you can have additional sort of home office, home atelier space on the Badnerstrasse side. And that turned out really well, the project. And I think the Zwischennutzung probably helped a bit in getting the attention, because the project was in the press quite a bit ever since it was squatted, the building, and then they sold all the apartments and all the spaces. So that was a really successful project, I think, for Mobimo. And we watched this coming from an old building, dusty UBS, IT, and then being turned into a really cool creative zone for a while, and then being turned into a modern and nice looking, hip living and workspace. That's one of the experiences that we have had. We see quite often that that buildings are kind of stripped, but the essence, the old structures are kept, and then there's something new created out of it. We don't really have a lot of projects where the owner just completely tears down the building and then rebuilds something else.
Yeah, that maybe it's a good moment for me to give my input to that question, because what clients often do with us is that they come with a building they own and ask, okay, what is the most economic way to continue using it? Should we, it is maybe at the end of its lifespan, should we completely tear it down, or should we, maybe just like tear down to leave the core structure and refurbish it? And we do there several scenarios, do evaluations of the scenarios, and very often come to the conclusion that the most economic approach would be to keep the main structure and to reuse it. Of course, if there is a lot of, if you can build more because of the zoning law that has changed, then it would maybe be more economic to rebuild a bigger building. But if what is allowed is within the volumetry that already exists, most of the times, like Switzerland in the 60s was building very, not always obviously, but these are quality buildings that it's really destroying value if you tear it completely down. So if you exchange the software of the building, you might create something that has more character, since it has been already part of that, it has been there already. And at the same time, you are reusing the existing and creating, putting it up to date. I think in that way, we do often steer to not build new and work with existing fabric.
I might have a follow-up question for Raffael. Like, you talked about the Badnerstrasse project, and we see Projekt Interim is mostly like dealing with this profile of users that is creatively sort of artists or startups that live in these, as you call them, hip and hyped spaces, like the structures that have been stripped and sort of redone inside to give these new sort of internal spaces. Do you see like these sort of users, are they differently coped to than users have like more high standards that would like to live or be situated more to the city center? And also, do you see them differently than social housing, like the Dolder hotel is? So how do you like see a shift in your users, or do you like to cope on different sort of elements, and whether the building is situated?
You have to tell me if I haven't really gotten your question, at least partly, but let me try to answer it as I understood it. So when I talked about the Partnerstrasse was really low budget rooms, 80 francs, anyone could afford it. So we had people there, and even then you have people that sometimes have a hard time paying it, but we had people there that afterwards were not the target group for the people that bought apartments and workspace afterwards at Partnerstrasse. I doubt that any one of our interim users of the original body project is now a client of Mobimo in that building. But it just, I think that the less, the rich hipsters, and they're often not really the creative ones, but they want to be around that zone. So you would have lawyers or guys from the financial industry that buy these new spaces because they have the money, they want to be in an urban, cool environment. But the artists themselves, they normally, in our experience, I mean, they need really cheap space and they move to a next project. We have a lot of interim users that are kind of followers, and it's great. It works both ways because they trust us, we trust them, and they have a big advantage. If you have been a client or a customer of Projekt Interims, and we know you, and we know that you're not going to tear down the room and you always paid your fees, then you're going to most likely get another project in another room in future project too. So we have these people that kind of move around with their ateliers. And then we also have we had this crazy high profile Alu-Swiss building right at the shore of Lake Zürich that cost us 35,000 rent a month. And we were a bit like, we hope that we get all this space to people, because it wasn't cheap. The square meter price wasn't cheap. And the building was difficult because it didn't have a lot of small spaces that you could just give to people with a key, but it had huge areas. And there, we had no problems selling everything within 2 weeks. And one startup came and said, we would like to have the whole building, please. And, it just showed us that it's for different space, there are different people that are interested, and especially in the startup scene, at least pre-corona, there is a lot of money. You also see it if you watch these people sipping their cappuccinos. I don't really think a lot of startups work that hard, to be honest, and they have space and they pay a lot of money for it. Also, co-working, these hubs, they're not so cheap to work there. So for different projects, very different people, and it's impossible to generalize. Did that cover at least part of your question?
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, it was just like we saw on your webpage that you host so many different buildings and that the user base must be so varied between.
Totally diverse.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
totally diverse. The only thing we have, we try to give the space to people that we think, okay, they need it. So with the example of the Dolder Waldhaus, we had some people that were obviously the guys that have their house in Wollerau because of taxes, and they wanted to have a pied-à-terre in Zurich. Again, the lawyers, the bankers, and we're like, no. You sorry, you don't get a space. We give it to people that actually need it. And then there also is an interesting aspect in terms of living space. You have to be careful though that you don't give it to people that they only can afford this space, and when the project is finished, they're on the street. That's also, it's delicate. We invest a lot of time in selecting the users.
So thank you very much for your explanation. Maybe the next question is going to Gabriela, because we were looking more at the profile at Wüest&Partner, and we somehow also in other courses here in university were finding out that your data and your analysis is sometimes the basis of the next investment, or sometimes even a prediction for the future. Like your company was looking at the effect of the COVID now on the whole market and what the investments are going to be. So our question would be like, how do you feel about responsibility of shaping the built environment here, especially in Switzerland?
The responsibility Wüest&Partner has with the built structure in Switzerland, is that right? Did I understand the question right?
Yeah, we were more wondering, like, you have such a big impact with your predictions for the future. So how do you feel about this responsibility also?
It is for sure a big responsibility, but we go also very carefully with our analysis and our predictions. I think we are very aware of that responsibility. Like our predictions mostly come from looking also at the past and different crises and project to the future. It's not that we try to be a trend scout and it's not about trends that we are predicting. We are really looking at data, and with that we can give some solid predictions, which of course not always are right, but it, as you say, it comes with the responsibility, and therefore there is we deal with that accordingly. I'm not sure I answered the question.
Yes, I think I think you answered it until a certain point, because we also were wondering further, like just not being the prediction maybe also, but also how we say the life of what's coming next. So the data maybe is somehow still coming from a point of view which is in our now, but also because yesterday there was a phrase coming up that we have enough technology and also maybe wealth, but we don't have the right philosophy for a good life. So how you could also maybe help us in the architectural field to somehow get to the next stage maybe?
Well, that would be maybe ask too much from Wüest&Partner. Like for Wüest&Partner, the most important thing is to be neutral, like to really just give a mirror of what is happening, and based on that, maybe a prediction to the future. But as I said, relatively conservative. When we talk about trends, it's stuff that we have been seeing in the now, or maybe we see from other countries and we report about it. But we have. It's not our goal to put our philosophy on architecture or on urbanism to our clients. We help them to do based on their data, on their documents, on their options they want to pursue. Based on that, to show them exactly how they can maybe, based on a matrix, make a better decision. What are the criteria to make the decision? Like we help to decide the clients better, but the idea, the options, the variant come from the clients. So in that sense, we are a little bit a step back. We keep a low profile.
Can I just ask kind of a related question? Because I mean, in our practice, we've been working with Wüest&Partner since we started our office in Zurich 12 years ago. I remember working with Martin Hoffer on early projects where he was on our side, kind of interrogating programs and things like that. I always find the more speculative work that Wüest&Partners does super interesting and often not so conservative. I had to set the diploma project this semester, and Nico Müller did an assessment of Thurgaustraße for us, and which is a weird kind of white elephant, which to me has a lot of potential. And I would say that the study he did, and it was for our eyes only, I guess, was very provocative. And he said some things which I don't know that he would say if Credit Suisse had been the client. But what's happened over the years is now every developer project we work on, Wüest&Partners is there, usually on the client side. And you said it, that you tend to take a conservative view, but I often think you take too conservative a view. And if I contrast, obviously, the situations that Raffael is making for Projekt Interim, and I want to come back to that in a moment, are the risk is somewhere else because they're short-term projects often, and if you can make the project fly in those first few months, you know it's kind of working. And what it's super interesting the way you're talking about how you choose your tenants as well. What I find with Wüest&Partners is, let's say for housing more than for offices, the market is really very, very conservative now. And if we are doing a project for Genossenschaft, what is discussed in terms of how you plan a dwelling, how you could perhaps reuse an existing building, there's much more openness with some Genossenschaft than there is now with, say, a project financed by Credit Suisse or by Pensimo or someone like that. It seems that in the last 5 or 6 years, the parameters for how you plan a 2.5, a 3.5, a 4.5, they become narrower and narrower. And Wüest&Partners have also developed very quantitative measurement techniques where they can locate the value in each apartment and then in the building, which is a new thing, but it's kind of interesting. But the effect is to really fall back on very, very proven typologies. And sometimes I can't believe it because you're doing a building with 250 apartments for Credit Suisse, and you're arguing about a living room being 2 square meters bigger or smaller, and you really can't believe this will make any difference whether the apartment rents or not at the amount that they want. And don't you think, I'd be interested to know, like, don't you think Wüest&Partners with some clients could identify projects where they could be, you know, like the Badner Straße project, where they could be a little bit more open? Let's say in this project, we could maybe be going for this profile of tenant or of owner, and maybe we could make some innovations. What do you is that impossible, or would it be, is there a way it could be possible?
No, of course it is possible. Like there's always, we are no robots, so there is a personal note when we are consulting our clients, but it's really depending on the client itself. And there is a lot being built by Pensionskassen, like pension funds and banks. And there is a very limited, room for experimentation. But I wouldn't not only say that the client, I mean, as I said, we help them decide. So maybe there is, in the range of options, there is one that would be a little bit more experimental than the other. But with these companies, the revenue is actually the main, the main leader. You say, okay, how can it be sustainable, but also, bring the maximum revenue? Maybe with Genossenschaften, there is a little bit more room for, saying, okay, we want the social aspect. For me, the city of Zurich is also an important client, and there's much more the social aspect than now the revenue. So it depends a lot on the client. I think that part, it is, one is the revenue, but the other, it is also a mirror of the society of Switzerland, how conservative. Okay, are there really enough people that want to live in this experimental new living form, whatever it is now, what typology? But I think the Swiss people, after a certain, it's also there is quite a conservative, also with the young Swiss people. I was reading that now the people around my age, they are all still longing for the one family building in the agglomeration that is the Swiss dream. So I think it's what we do is also a mirror of the society. We can push a little bit, like what I like to push for is for a little bit higher ceiling heights when there are apartments. I think a smaller apartment is not so problematic if the ceiling is not at 240. I try to recommend these things, but at the end of the day, it's still, depending on the client, the criteria, the most important criteria that gets the decision.
And Raffael, I mean, do you think Wüest&Partners are too conservative?
Attention.
I'm debating myself if I should push him on direction. I think Wüest&Partner, they're thought leaders. You guys are thought leaders. And after just watching David Attenborough's Alive on This Planet grand movie that you should all watch, it's on Netflix, you know, I think thought leaders should also assume leadership. And in one of our projects, that's on a small scale, but especially in the area of sustainability, smart use of space, a zero emission, all these topics, I think we need organizations, thought leaders that push. And these banks, I mean, the banks, they also still invest in carbon intensive businesses. It's just someone has to push them. So I would appreciate if Wüest&Partner, because and Martin Hofer, of course, he's now out of the organization, but I got to know him. He's of course, he's also a very colorful type that probably doesn't shy away from giving quite innovative and quite blunt recommendations, pushing to one side. And he was one of the advocates for Projekt Interim at the very early beginnings of our life as a company, because he told clients, yeah, try it with them, it's a good thing. And in one of our projects, 2014, when a factory, the former Tomy aluminum tubes, they had gone out of business, and there's huge 22,000 square meters factory halls and an office building, and they were looking for someone that could organize a Zwischennutzung that would make at least 180,000 francs a year, which is a lot of money for just base in a factory, an old factory. And Martin Hofer got us to pitch. So it's an example of how Wüest&Partner also really helped to make interim use of buildings salonfähig, made it acceptable, because first the clients thought it was kind of like a squat, just with some rules. And when Mr. Ledermann walked through Badnerstraße and he inspected the building, you know, he said, wow, that's not even dirty. Wow, there is no paint throwing around. You know, these people, they thought at first, Zwischennutzung, it's crazy. It's like Jackson Pollocks all over the place. But it's not. It's just people sitting in their offices in front of the computers or living. And that was an example how you guys, Wüest&Partner, helped pushing something a little bit. That was certainly a positive win-win project for everyone.
So I may want to jump on the phrase you said, like thought leaders. And I don't know if you followed any of the talks yesterday, or I'm pretty sure you're familiar with our semester topic. And we talk about what is next. And we know certain things that are next, like this crisis will soon maybe be over, but climate change is imminent. And we talked about how we teach architecture in the future and how we need to cope. The idea, and also like we are in this together, all of us, and this crisis sort of put us into the spotlight that we are all sort of touched by this crisis, and we are all going to be inflected by climate change. So as thought leaders and people with influence, I'm going to put you in a spotlight right here. How does your field of work and your companies sort of try to contribute to this future of change? And how do you see investment having an influence in how we change?
Well, I have to say that in Switzerland, we are kind of in a bubble compared to different places in the world and how much they have been affected by the crisis. I can't. I wouldn't say that we have taken an active role in this process so far. We are still kind of Beobachter also, and seeing, like, trying to figure out what is going to be next. We think, or I think, that it's definitely a catalyzer, not just for the bad, but for many good things, that really change was needed. And maybe there were things that were already changing slowly, but now with the crisis, there has been a bigger shift. I wouldn't say that we are now actively yet taking, being sure what is next.
But are we talking about crisis? But I'm not sure if you're talking about the same crisis: climate crisis or COVID crisis. That the question goes to the.
I thought it was going COVID crisis.
Aha! But I think you were referring to climate crisis, no?
Like climate change is global, and the crisis also.
I thought we were talking.
It is not.
No, there I think.
So it's global crisis and discourses that we are all facing.
Yeah.
So the question goes to the climate crisis. I think there we are taking a big role. I mean, there we have a whole department that is devoting to that, and we are trying to encourage our clients to do a so-called carbon monoxide fad. So all their portfolios really start to use renewable energies for their heatings, etc. There we are advocating for that, for a change, definitely.
Maybe Raffael, you also want to add something to?
Yeah. Well, our business has always been kind of a role model business for sustainability, because we bring space to the market which would otherwise be vacant and not used. So it's kind of a Verdichtung. What is that in English? That make things more dense. But if you talk about Verdichtung in architecture, it's always, well, build higher up. And we took the approach that you can do that, but you can also be more dense in your scheduling of using the space. And space that was not even used, because between, for example, the resolution to tear down a building or to remodel a building and the actual start of the construction, typically in this time you counted, factored in some slack, where you had the whole building empty and you just nailed everything shut, or had Securitas guarding the building, and then when you were ready, you set out and start construction. And with our projects, we make this phase, we kind of reduce the phase of non-use to an absolute minimum, so that ideally the interim users move out, and then the next day in the morning after the weekend, where you have to clean everything and take everything, the trash out, then the Bauherrschaft comes and starts construction. And this is per se, of course, sustainability. We're proud of making an impact of just kind of reusing or maximizing the use of space of all kind. And yep, that's basically it. So our business is certainly a good one if you look at the ecological footprint.
I agree with that. And I mean, I think what's especially impressive about your portfolio is how many ugly buildings there are in it. You know, you're kind of suspending judgment about what's good and what's bad.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's I haven't heard this comment like this, but I like it, yeah.
We're doing this semester.
Let me just add something to it, because that's a really interesting element of the Zwischennutzung. And so we give typically our people, our interim users, the freedom to create whatever they want in their space. So they can paint, they can drill holes, hang up stuff. They must not do this on the outside of the building. And we had some cases where they painted balconies, you know, and then we had to step in. And there are some exceptions. We have some landmark protected buildings too, where they can do nothing. But typically, even in an ugly duckling, they can just create their own space. And if you go to some of these spaces, it's just awesome what they do. Even for where I have my office at Holstrasse, that's a really ugly building, just vis-a-vis of the new Justice and Police Department building. It's this old carpet, and some of the interim users have really turned around their space, put new carpet in, painted everything, furniture, and it looks great. So inside, a lot of these buildings have then come to life, and outside they're ugly. Yes, true. Especially the older Waldhaus.
But what I wanted to ask you is, I mean, you're working in property, but the way you talk, a lot of you're also like an advocate. And I think it happened in a good direction, that you didn't start as an advocate. You started because there was this situation in Badnerstrasse that had to be dealt with. But actually what you've developed does have a kind of almost an activist element to it. And I'm just wondering, have you thought of ways in which, because the city of Zurich, for instance, there's a big shortage of schools. And the classic way that the city dealt with that was to build new schools. And it typically takes 10 years from the competition or the test planning to the completion. And if we do the next few schools, by the time they're finished, the kids won't be there anymore. So the city of Zurich have changed their approach, and they're now willing to renovate existing buildings, like industrial buildings, there are a lot of empty industrial spaces, to become schools for maybe only for 10 or 15 years. And I think that's a great step. But clearly, the example of Projekt Interim is that approach, you know, has quite a wide application. It has, I think, for your business model, it is about these rather short-term projects, and that's great. But have you thought of ways, because you must know a lot of people, have you thought of ways in which, you know, some planning policy could be changed in order to learn from some of the things that you've discovered in your practice?
Yeah, and we have had actually also talks with politicians that on a few occasions, of course, we had to also talk to authorities to try to get projects approved. And we were in the background supporting a political party, but in the background because we don't want to side with anyone. But we supported them in wording an initiative in the city of Zurich to make a different use of buildings easier if it's just for a temporary use project. Because if you apply the normal Swiss crazy, for me at least, regulations, if you want to build something, if it's just a 3 months, 1 year, 2 year project, then it doesn't work. Then nothing is done. Which in a lot of cases you just have to say, well, is it really now necessary that we follow all these rules? Because then you kill the project. And we have been active, but every now and then a bit behind the scenes or in projects to enable interim use. And yeah, and authorities, with one really a recent example, authorities, they're much more willing to consider interim projects. For example, I got a call about 2 months ago from the head of the notarial services of the state of Zurich, and he had known me before because we had talked about knowledge management in notarial services in the canton of Zurich. But he called me and said, do you have office space? Because we probably need more space on a temporary basis when all these bankruptcies come because of COVID. And we expect them to come in October, November, December 2020. And then we might need like that a lot more space to be able to staff all these liquidation proceedings. So that shows that authorities, they now consider that too. And when everything, also big trend, of course, is mobility and flexibility and modularity also. So you can move an office a lot better if everything is paperless than you could 20 years ago. You just have most of our customers, they have laptops, they have light tables, chairs, a bookshelf, and that's it, computers. And that with schools, it might be similar, at least for some schools. And I see definitely potential there too. Also flexibility, not signing up for 20 years or even more, but just for maybe 3 years or 2 years and then deciding where to go next.
Gabriela, you want to add something to that, or?
Well, maybe of the sort that, yeah, the concept of interim use is something that has become more and more salon-fähig in Switzerland, not only with investors, but also with authorities, not for them using it, but also from a city planning perspective. Like instead of having in an old town, like there is a big problem with retail, that retail is dying, and then you have a dead old town that might lose attractivity for tourists, etc. So they have a certain interest that these empty spaces are being used temporarily. So in many cities, there have been some motivation to make the permits easier for short-term use, because the permits, the regulations can be a complete killer for a project with a little margin for short time. So there are investments, and it has to be in proportion. You can't be waiting for half a year for a permit for something that will then be for 2 months up or something. So I think there is definitely a movement towards facilitating this type of projects.
So maybe we would ask also the audience or in the chat if anybody has a question we would, or she would like to ask.
So if not, maybe your project Interim is focusing on temporary usage. Do you, like with the current movement of densing up our cities and reusing the existing fabric, do you see a way that your company could also go into the long-term sort of transformation of these spaces, that they're moving from a temporary usage to a long-term usage?
Yeah, what we have done, we don't want to all of a sudden do any type of use or rent, because that would water down our profile. It needs to be temporary use projects. But what we have done before is we have been in consulting of owners in how they could make their new project attractive. And that's interesting. So consulting kind of behind the scenes, what to do with the building, what we think could work. Because of course we have a good sense of what works and what not with all our projects. And if capacity allows, what would be possible is that we have kind of a separate company or a separate entity that focuses on longer projects and on the developing of property. But that's still the future. We want to do this our business well.
So there's also a question from the chat going to Raffael. Is there a department for the consideration of upgrading all buildings to compatibility with planning regulations? In your experience, is there any wriggle room, or is there inflexibility? You must do this. Okay, this is not readable, but so is there an experience of you in any way to somehow get in this room?
to get projects approved, I guess. I mean, yeah, that we have quite a bit of experience, but what we do, and I mean this, I hope this should stay within this seminar, but what has proven to be quite a good approach in our project is that we start a project, and then authorities, for example, in this project of this big Tomi-Tuben areal close to in Rheinach, close to Basel-Stadt, we just started with a Zwischennutzung, which was using an office building for laser tag. Laser tag, these guys could pay a lot of money, so that financed basically the backbone of the Zwischennutzung. They took all the furniture, now they left all the furniture in and used this for laser tag. People running around in a 3-story office building. I could have found out that this needed Umnutzungsbaugesuch, but I didn't really want to. We just said, let's start, because we knew it was safe, and we did. And then 3 months later, the community came, the Baukommission, and said, hey, you need, and then in the language they send you is always very harsh, and you think, oh my God. But then when you talk to the authorities, that in Switzerland, and I think that's generally the case, authorities are really friendly and helpful. And especially if that's how I handle it, I just say, can you please help me? Because we really don't know what to do. We want to make this project work. And if it's too strict, we have to stop it. And would that not be a pity? Because then there is no restaurant pop up, or there is no laser tag in Rheinach, or there is no a bar here in this old building, and we can't do this, we can't do that. And then if you approach them in a way of, please help me so we get this right, then it's I haven't had any really bad experience. It's sometimes astonishing, and you have to really say, really? I mean, for example, we used an old people's home that had there were really old people in this home, and then it was moved to another more modern building, and this old people's home was empty, but still had all the infrastructure in it. So we wanted to turn it into a student home. Well, that needed a Baugesuch too, and they were concerned about the safety, because in event of a fire, people couldn't get out. I was like, how can this building be safe for old people, when it probably took hours to get them down from the second floor, and then be all of a sudden unsafe? So you have to go through the whole process again for young people that can jump out of the balcony and not even breaking a leg. So, but there, the tactics is remain friendly and calm at all price. Ask for help, say, yes, actually, that's true. We really want to play it safely, and we understand it. And then it works. If you start being aggressive, then you have a problem, because they just then block it. So, but that's the case with all authorities, probably in Switzerland and abroad, with the difference that in Switzerland, authorities are generally competent, quite quick, and really helpful and friendly if you respect them and you remain friendly.
I think they're much more helpful in Switzerland than in some other countries. Definitely. They're also more efficient. Gabriela, I wanted to ask you, but also how Wüest&Partners, how do you approach advocacy? Because you're in a position of a lot of power. You're working with clients, of course, but you're also doing much more speculative research, like the one we used it a few years ago about Niederdorf and retail. It's a very interesting document which started a whole discussion. You've mentioned research that you're doing about sustainability and getting to zero carbon levels. You also have an enormous amount of knowledge about the relationship of the building regulations and dwelling plans, for instance. And, you know, another thing I'm very aware of is that there are some conflicts now. You know, these number of buildings in Recours in Zurich about the acoustic regulations, for instance, where you used to be able to have a certain proportion of amber, you know, with a little bit of noise, but not the full noise. And then people have made recours to frustrate these developments, and it's now in the High Court. And no developer, and I mean, it's not that Wüest&Partner would have done this, but all the developers that we work with knew about the problem, but none of them actually tried to change the law because they thought it'll just continue being this informal agreement, and it might not be. But that's a detail. How does Wüest&Partners, how do they work as advocates? Like on what subjects and using what instruments do you try to change the context that we're developing and building in?
Well, I mean, from a philosophical point of view, we try to use common sense. And yes, we are not afraid of long procedures and talking to the regulators, like to the public hand. We are a lot in contact with them, and we do together change also regulations or work together to change regulations. Normally, the regulations were made in common sense, maybe in a different context time ago. And so people are mostly open to create a change when there is a nonsense that is really avoiding that there is a development forward and that it's out of date. So there is a lot, the tools are trust, like we are so long on the market, there is such long relationships with the authorities that there is a lot of acceptance from all type of people, like from the investors, but also from the authorities. So we are kind of an interface in between, and the authorities are also always striving to become more professional, more state-of-the-art, and so I think it's often a lack of communication, that there are these fronts that think, the authorities are always working against me. And I think if you really read into the efforts that the authorities are trying to do, actually the authorities are trying to really work for the public in this country. Again, they're efficient, they are competent. I consider, Switzerland not to be the norm necessarily, but here I can think that there is real trust for this type of, you can trust the authorities that they are trying. If they don't manage, at least they are trying to go to a more, efficient or modern approach.
I agree with that, but I think there are certain regulations which were developed for 4-story buildings, for instance, 4-story dwellings, which are now being applied to 80-meter buildings. For instance, the requirement that every dwelling bigger than a studio needs to have an outdoor space, that every dwelling needs every habitable room to have an opening window on a side that doesn't have noise, and noise in Zurich is very quiet. And these are situations that come up in almost every tall building project that one works on. And these regulations are just accepted. And they're completely stupid regulations. And everybody on the client side realizes it, but they just put their hands up and they say, that's the way it is. And as a result, I think there's tall buildings, and I'm not a big fan of tall buildings, but we're doing some. There's tall buildings being planned now that are much, much worse because they have to solve these problems, you know?
Yes.
I think that if you live above, 35 meters, you can live without an outdoor space. I live.
You don't want to be in a balcony at that height.
And we have a balcony and we have some plants on it, but we never go out on the balcony. It's not possible. It's too windy. And if the city wants the density, which they do want because developers have pushed and architects have pushed them to accept high buildings, then there should be some perhaps exceptions in tall buildings, or a new set of rules that are about dwelling in tall buildings. In offices, it's much easier because none of these things are issues in offices. And I'm just wondering, you know, I think Wüest&Partners, for instance, could play a big role because you're an intermediary between the big investment funds who are super conservative and who don't want to rock the boat, but who also have a lot of power as far towards the politicians in Zurich and cantonal government.
No, we do projects like that, and again, this is an example just that it's being very slow. Like high risers are a relatively new phenomenon for Switzerland, so the rules are completely behind. I'm sure that the regulators are aware of these things and are trying to maybe go to the right direction. Like there has to be a client that hires us for something like that, and it's very often the regulators that come to us, and we help them develop new rules. But it's very slow and it's extremely political, particularly with the high buildings. There is an excess of democracy in Switzerland, and I would say, especially with the building, and everybody can say what they think. And I wouldn't say that the majority is for high risers. So particularly on that topic, I think there is a lot of Widerstand, I would say, like to even facilitate that they exist. And then maybe when that is a little bit implemented then the regulations will also come. But I agree that they are very much behind with the regulations on high rises, and also there is still relatively little experience with building high risers. It's just a matter of time, and we can help so much because it's many instances that it has to go through, and many people are against it. So I think the regulators that want to change it hire us, but there is no guarantee that because it is common sense, then it's being changed relatively fast. There are long processes.
Maybe if there's not any other question for now, there's also one from the chat going to Raffael.
I see that. Should I just read it myself? Or no, everyone needs to hear it, right? Yeah, you can. It's probably better if, or how should we do it? Do you want to read it?
I can just read it out, yeah.
Okay, great. That might be smarter, yeah.
With regards to how you finance your very first interim use project before you had rent coming in from the tenants.
That's an interesting question. So we set out, we founded the GmbH that cost 20,000 francs. But apart from that, we didn't need any money. I mean, we just had computers and we had contacts, and all our first projects, we never took the risk. So the financial risk. So the mode was, or the structure was always that we would collect the money from the interim users and pass part of this money on to the owner. And if we found no interim users at all, the owner wouldn't get any money. Only quite late in our corporate life, we started to assume taking the rent risk for some projects, but not for all of them, but for some, on us, or took the risks of Nebenkosten. What's that in English?
Utilities.
Utilities can be huge. At Dolder Waldhaus, utilities cost a lot. So we had to be quite big then to be able to take this risk. At the beginning, we just never took any risks. We said we're too small. We can organize it, and but we can't assume the risk of you, owner. And that was particularly easy to do when you had a contracting partner, Ledermann Immobilien or Mobimo, or Swiss Re or something. We said, if they tried to put this risk on us, we said, that's funny because you're a super tanker and we're 20,000 francs GmbH. We're happy to do the project for you and we're really good, but we can't assume the financial risks. And they always understood that. So we started with nothing. We never had any financing up until today, we never had loans or any financing. We just always financed ourselves. But it's a low capital business because you basically need an office, and we always had our offices in Zwischennutzungen, and then you have salaries, and we were careful employing people, just slowly building up, not putting out the sales organization with people all over the place that you have to pay. And I, of course, for the first years, I did it for all the legal structuring and everything. That was just my hobby. I worked for the company. I didn't get paid, and then that's the way it worked. It worked really well. And I would recommend, if anyone is engaging in a startup, keep it really lean at the beginning. You know, start small. Always use freelancers instead of employing people. And then with the success, you can rev up the structures. But that's better than taking investors on board that tell you what to do and playing with their money. We always also, we really wanted to be independent. So it's 3 owners of the GmbH, and that was it. We didn't want anyone else to tell us what to do.
So thank you very much for all your answers and also your introduction. And yeah, if there's any other question or anything else, I would just hand over to Adam.
I just think it's a good place to stop. I mean, thank you so much. It was super interesting. I still think that somewhere in the combination of what Interim and what Wüest&Partners do, there's a kind of advocacy line, you know, which would really be about somehow bringing the kind of situation that's on the ground, incredible, because between the two of you, you kind of represent all of the sorts of users that one has in a building, you know, from the most fragile artistic startup, you know, to big corporate clients. And yeah, I just think that somehow there's a knowledge in there, and we got a little bit of it in the session today that could be really brought to bear in how urban policy is developed, you know, in terms of what we want to do with the city, like keeping more existing buildings, and Raffael showing how you can, all sorts of buildings have more use than you think they have in them. And then also I think about how you could refurbish buildings, you know, with a much lighter touch, actually, like this ersatz, what is it called? Yeah, this ersatz Neubau. Yeah, ersatz Neubau, which is almost becomes completely Neubau. Like, I think it could be a bit less Neubau a lot of the time. And I think we could live with seeing just normal buildings around the city. Anyway, thank you very, very much. It's really also connects very, very strongly to what we're doing in this semester. And yeah, I hope to see both of you again. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I really think that there are discussions like that with people from different angles, looking at things from different angles, multi-disciplinary discussions. It's very interesting, and it can really push things forward. And we're happy to do this more often, of course. Good luck to all of you. Stay healthy.